Good morning. It's so good to be back and see all of you here this morning. I hope you all had a wonderful new year and a good Christmas and everything above and below and in between. To start off this morning, I just want to kind of recap where we've been, to kind of remind us where we're going, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do today. So where we've been was we are in week 6 of our study on Revelation. And we started, well, it's been about 7 or 8 weeks ago, so we've taken a couple weeks off. But we started on week 1, and we kind of laid an introduction about how we're going to approach this study. And we also diffused our first semantic bomb, which was literal versus figurative. And we said that we want to read Revelation not literally, not figuratively, but naturally. If he's using a symbol, let it be a symbol. If he's saying something literal, let it be literal. Read it naturally. Don't try to force it into this scheme because language just doesn't work that way. And we gave all kinds of examples then. If you don't remember, go to the website and you can rewatch it because they're all on there. The second week, we diffused some more semantic bombs. We talked about, are we living in the last days? And we looked at the Bible and we found that the Bible tells us that the last days is referring to between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. And as a result, we are living in the last days and we have been for 2,000 years. The third question that we dealt with was, what is prophecy? And we found the Bible again tell us that it's not just prediction. But what prophecy is a revelation about who God is, what God desires, and what God demands from us. So then came week 3, and we started on dealing with the 6 elements of context. We have context as how we want to read the Bible, because if you take things out of context, you can do whatever you want. And we started the first week dealing with genre, and we saw that Revelation has 3 genres. The first one is the epistolary genre, which is a fancy word for a letter. Exactly, a letter. It is a letter. It is also a prophetic genre, which is something that describes who God is, what He desires, and what He demands from us. And the third genre we found was apocalyptic literature. The $50 word, $25 word, however much you're willing to give for it. Apocalyptic literature, which is heavily laden with symbolism. That right there kind of laid the foundation of how we are supposed to look at Revelation. What questions are we supposed to ask? Because it matters what section in the newspaper you're in. Remember that. So the genre we established as those 3. Then we went on the second element of the 6 elements of context and talked about the historical context. What was going on at the time Revelation was written? Who was it written to and what were they going through? And we found that you could sum up that whole thing with the word conflict. It was a group of Christians in the middle of extreme conflict. Then last week, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about the third and the fourth elements of context, and those were symbols and the sources of the symbols. We talked about Revelation because of the genre and other factors. It's heavily laden with symbolism. And so when you come to different things like numbers, what do we do with numbers? We don't measure them, we weigh them. Exactly, because with numbers, when you weigh them in a symbolic context, the meaning comes out more. We'll talk about that actually more today. But then we talked about the sources. The sources of the symbols. Revelation has 404 verses and over 500 allusions to the Old Testament. If you don't know Revelation, if it confuses you, if your mind is boggled by it, it's probably because you don't know your Old Testament. Because John used the Old Testament to develop this tapestry, this beautiful picture that he's given to the Christians that are in conflict in Asia Minor, 1st century, at the end of the reign of Domitian, 95-96. And all of that kind of sums up where we come to today. We're dealing with the 5th element today of context. And next week we will deal with element number 6. And element number 6 is application. And the week after that, I want to end our series the way that John ends his book, and we're going to have a whole day on heaven. Just talking about what heaven will be, what we will look like, who will be there, all of the above. But this week, we're talking about element number 5, and element number 5 is structure. And I'm just going to be flat out honest with you. This is hard. This is going to be hard. So I'm going to challenge you right off the front to just get ready to buckle down, to really concentrate hard when we're going through this, because it's going to be totally counterintuitive to what you're normally used to. And that'll become more clear once we get going. But first, what I want to do is I want to talk to you about your homework. Those of you that did it, I really want to hear from you. I want to hear the different things that you struggled with. I want to hear the different things that you really got. I want to hear the parts that were hard, the parts that were easy. Maybe you noticed something new when you were outlining the text. For those of you that don't know, the homework was they were supposed to read Revelation 6 through 20 and make an outline of Revelation chapter 6 through Revelation chapter 20. And I want to hear what happened. I may end up finding out that no one did it, and that would be something that would tell me something about the assignment. But just go ahead, either yell it out or raise your hand or whatever. Oh my. A lot of homework being done out there, right? Well, maybe you're too shy, and so I'll go ahead and give you an idea of what you would have found if you did it, or if I'm vocalizing some of you that did it and just don't want to say it. When you try to outline Revelation, it is absolutely, virtually impossible. It is so difficult. I mean, you'll have your Roman numeral 1, and then you'll have your capital A, and you'll get to going, and you get to chapter 6, and you're like, okay, this is the 6th, okay, you have seals, no problem. You get to the 6th seal, and you're waiting for the 7th seal, but it doesn't come for another chapter and a half. The 7th seal doesn't come to chapter 8, so then the question becomes, how do I then put in the outline chapter 7? And then finally you get to the 7th seal and you're like, okay, we're doing good now. And then you go into the 7 trumpets. And you get to the 6th trumpet, and what happens? It's at the end of chapter 9. In chapter 10 and 11, you finally get to the 7th trumpet at the end of chapter 11, but you have all this chapter in the middle that has nothing to do with the trumpets. And then you're thinking, okay, fine, we're done with the trumpets. And then you get to chapter 12, and chapter 12 has nothing to do with the trumpets or the seals. It's totally different. So then you go chapter 12, 13, and 14, you're like, okay, those make sense together. Then you come to chapter 15, and it's kind of an introduction to the bowls in chapter 16, and then you have to start over with the problem again. And then you get to chapter 17, and it seems to be something totally separate from that. Chapter 17 and 18 seem like they go together, but then you get to chapter 19, and it starts something totally different again. And the same thing happens in chapter 20, and then finally you get to 21 and 22, which seem to make sense because that's the new heavens and the new earth. That's what happens when you outline Revelation chapter 6 through 20, or if you go to 22. It is confusing. And when you try to plot it out the way we plot it out, it becomes almost impossible. And the reason why is because Revelation is an unfamiliar organization of thoughts. Have any of you ever seen, well, first of all, let me talk about that statement real quick. It is not unfamiliar thoughts. The thoughts are going to be very familiar. But it's an unfamiliar organization of those thoughts. The structure of it's weird. Have any of you ever seen the movie Memento? If you don't want to raise your hand, that's fine. I'll tell you. First of all, I'll tell you, I really wouldn't suggest go see it because number one, it's not necessarily edifying, and number two, it is weird. You start off the movie, and you're at the end of the movie. And you watch the ending of it, and then it backs up like 5 or 10 minutes, then you watch those 5 minutes, and then you watch the ending again, and then you go back another 5 minutes, and then you watch it all the way to the end, and you're back, and it does this